"Daddy, can we take her home for Christmas?" Little girl spots a homeless Chinese widow in the snow. It was a cold winter morning, the kind where the air feels sharp and every breath turns into a small cloud. Snow had fallen all night, covering the streets, trees, and rooftops in soft white layers. The city looked quiet, almost peaceful, as if it were holding its breath. Cars moved slowly, and people walked faster than usual, pulling their coats tight and keeping their heads down. A father and his little daughter stepped out of their apartment building and began walking toward the nearby grocery store. It was a simple routine they often did together, especially during the holidays. The father believed these small walks were important. They gave him time to talk to his child, to listen to her thoughts, and to teach her small lessons about life without making it feel like a lesson at all. The little girl was about 6 years old. She wore a red winter coat that was a little too big for her, with white buttons and a hood lined with soft fur. Her boots made small crunching sounds as she stepped through the snow. She held her father's hand tightly, her gloves warm but already damp from touching the snow-covered railings along the way. She was excited about Christmas. The lights on the buildings, the decorations in shop windows, and the songs playing everywhere filled her with joy. She talked about the tree they had decorated at home, the cookies they planned to bake, and the gift she was making for her father at school. The father smiled as he listened, nodding and responding, happy to hear her cheerful voice. As they passed a small park near the road, the little girl suddenly slowed down. Her steps became careful, and her grip on her father's hand tightened. The father noticed and looked down at her, about to ask what was wrong. Before he could speak, she gently pulled him toward the park bench near the entrance. Sitting there was an elderly woman. She was small and thin, her body slightly bent forward as if she was trying to protect herself from the cold. She wore a long, worn coat that looked too light for the weather. A faded scarf was wrapped around her neck, but it did little to stop the cold wind. Her hands were bare, red from the cold, resting quietly on her lap. At her feet was a single old bag. It looked heavy, not because it was full, but because it carried the weight of everything she owned. Snow had gathered on the bag and on the edge of the bench. The woman did not seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and her face held a tired, distant expression, as if she were lost in memories far away from this cold morning. The little girl stared at her for a long moment. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with confusion and concern. She had seen many people before, but something about this woman felt different. The silence around her felt heavy. "Daddy," the girl said softly, tugging at his coat. "Why is that grandma sitting there in the snow?" The father followed her gaze and saw the woman clearly now. He paused. He had noticed people like her before, but like many others, he often walked past, telling himself there was nothing he could do at that moment. Seeing her through his daughter's eyes made it harder to look away. "She might be resting," he said carefully, choosing his words. "But she looks very cold," the girl replied, "and sad." The father did not answer right away. He watched the woman's shoulders rise and fall slowly as she breathed. Snowflakes landed on her hair, which was streaked with gray. She did not brush them away. They continued walking, but the girl kept turning her head to look back. After a few steps, she stopped completely. "Daddy," she said again, her voice quieter now, "can we help her?" The father felt a tightness in his chest. He knelt down so he was at eye level with his daughter. "We are going to the store right now," he said gently. "It's very cold. We'll be late if we stop." The girl nodded, but her eyes still showed worry. She looked back at the bench one more time before they continued. As they walked, the father found it hard to focus on his daughter's cheerful talk. The image of the woman stayed in his mind. He wondered how long she had been sitting there. He wondered where she would go when night came. He wondered why she was alone on such a cold day, especially so close to Christmas. At the store, the girl was unusually quiet. She helped pick apples and bread, but her excitement seemed smaller than before. When they stood in line to pay, she suddenly spoke again. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him, "she didn't have gloves." The father swallowed. "I know. And she didn't have anyone with her." "I know," he repeated softly. On the walk back home, the snow began to fall harder. The wind grew stronger, and the father felt thankful for his thick coat and warm boots. He thought again of the woman and felt a sense of discomfort he could not ignore. When they reached their apartment, the little girl hung up her coat and boots slowly. She sat down on the bench near the door and did not run to her room like she usually did. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but serious, "why doesn't she have a home?" The father took a deep breath. "Sometimes," he said, "life becomes very hard for some people. They lose things they love, they lose places they feel safe." The girl thought about this. "Is it because she was bad?" "No," he answered quickly. "Not at all." She nodded, accepting his answer, but her eyes still looked heavy with thought. That afternoon, while the girl colored pictures at the table, the father stood by the window and looked outside. Snow covered the park now, and the bench was barely visible from a distance. He wondered if the woman was still there. He wondered if anyone else had noticed her. He felt a quiet sense of regret for walking past without stopping. At the same time, he felt unsure. Helping a stranger was not always simple. There were risks, responsibilities, and fears that adults carried. But his daughter's question echoed in his mind. Why doesn't she have a home? As evening approached, the sky darkened early, and lights began to glow in windows across the street. Christmas decorations flickered on, bright and warm against the cold night. The father prepared dinner, but his thoughts kept returning to the park. When he tucked his daughter into bed that night, she held his hand tightly. "Daddy," she whispered, her eyes already half closed, "I hope the grandma is warm tonight." The father kissed her forehead and smiled gently. "I hope so too." After she fell asleep, he sat alone in the living room. The apartment was warm, quiet, and safe. He looked around and realized how much he took these things for granted. Somewhere not far away, an elderly woman sat alone in the cold, unseen by most, carrying a life full of memories and loss. That night the father made a silent decision. He did not know exactly what he would do yet, but he knew he could not forget the woman on the bench. The next morning he promised himself he would go back to the park. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering footprints and making the city quiet once again. And on a small bench in the park, a simple moment between a child and a stranger had already begun to change a story that neither of them yet understood. The next morning began even colder than the day before. The sky was pale gray and the snow on the ground had turned hard overnight. The father woke up early, long before his daughter. He lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to the quiet of the apartment. His mind returned to the park bench, to the elderly woman sitting alone in the snow, and to the question his daughter had asked with such innocence and care. He slowly got up and moved through the apartment without making noise. In the kitchen, he boiled water and prepared something warm to eat. He packed bread, fruit, and a thermos filled with hot tea. Then he found an extra scarf and a thick blanket they rarely used. As he folded it, he paused, wondering if the woman would still be there. A part of him feared she would be gone, moved by someone else or forced to leave. Another part feared she would still be sitting in the same place, colder than before. Before leaving, he looked into his daughter's room. She was asleep, her face calm and peaceful. Seeing her like that strengthened his resolve. He closed the door gently and stepped outside. The cold air hit his face immediately. He pulled his coat tighter and walked quickly toward the park. Snow crunched under his boots, loud in the early morning silence. The city was waking up slowly, but the park remained mostly empty. As he approached the bench, his heart sank and then lifted at the same time. The woman was still there. She sat in the same place, her posture unchanged, though she looked even more tired than before. Her coat was dusted with fresh snow, and her hands were tucked under her arms as if trying to hold onto whatever warmth remained in her body. For a moment, The father simply stood there, unsure how to begin. He cleared his throat softly and took a step closer. "Good morning," he said gently. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes cautious but not unfriendly. She nodded once, saying nothing. "I brought you something warm," he said, holding out the thermos and the bag of food, "and a blanket." For a moment she hesitated. Then she reached out with shaking hands and accepted the items. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders carefully, as if it were something precious. The steam from the thermos fogged the cold air when she opened it. "Thank you," she said quietly, her accent noticeable but her words clear. He sat down on the bench at a respectful distance. "It's very cold today," he said. "I was worried." She nodded again. "Yes, winter is hard." They sat in silence for a short while. The woman sipped the tea slowly, as if trying to make it last. The father watched her face as warmth returned to her cheeks little by little. "My name is Li Mei," she said after a moment, her voice soft. "You came back." "I did," he replied. "My daughter saw you yesterday. She was worried about you." At the mention of the child, something changed in the woman's expression. Her eyes softened. "She has kind eyes," Li Mei said. "Children see things adults forget." The father smiled faintly. "She asked me why you were sitting here in the snow." I didn't know how to answer. Li Mei looked down at her hands. "Life takes strange turns," she said, "sometimes very suddenly." She did not speak for a while after that. The father did not rush her. He understood that some stories needed time and patience. After a few minutes, she continued. "I came here many years ago with my husband. He was a quiet man, very hardworking. We believed things would be better here." She paused, her eyes fixed on the trees in the park. Snow clung to the branches like white feathers. "He worked long hours," she went on. "I cleaned houses. We did not have much, but we had each other. That was enough." Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept going. "Then he became sick," she said. "Very suddenly, everything changed." The father listened carefully, his hands resting on his knees. "I tried to manage alone," Li Mei said, "but my English was not strong. Jobs became harder to find. Rent became higher. Friends moved away. Little by little, I lost everything I knew." She took another sip of tea, her hand steadying now. "I stayed with relatives for a while," she continued, "but they had their own struggles. I did not want to be a burden." The word burden seemed to carry a deep weight for her. The father felt a tightening in his chest. "So I left," she said quietly. "I thought I could manage. I thought I would find work again. But winter came." The father looked around the park, suddenly seeing it differently. What had once seemed like a simple place now felt like a witness to many unseen lives. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Li Mei shook her head. "Life is not always fair," she said, "but kindness still exists. You came back. That matters." They sat together for a long time, talking quietly. She told him small details about her past, about the food she used to cook, the holidays she once celebrated, and the traditions she missed. Christmas, she said, was especially difficult. "In my home," she said, "this time was for family, warm food, laughter. Even when we had little, we shared it." She looked at the ground again. "Now the lights feel too bright. They remind me of what I lost." The father understood. He thought of his daughter's excitement, the decorations in their home, and the warmth waiting for him there. The contrast felt heavy. Before leaving, he stood up and said, "I'll come back later with my daughter." Li Mei looked surprised. "You do not have to," she said quickly. "You have already done much." "I want to," he replied simply. As he walked away, he felt different than he had the day before. He felt a mix of sadness and purpose. Li Mei was no longer just a stranger on a bench. She was a person with a story, with loss, with dignity. When he returned home, his daughter was awake and eating breakfast. She looked up eagerly. "Daddy," she asked, "did you see the grandma?" "I did," he said, sitting down beside her. "Her name is Li Mei." "Is she okay?" the girl asked, her eyes wide. "She's very strong," he replied, "but she's been through a lot." The girl thought for a moment. "Did she smile?" "Yes," he said, "a little." That was enough to make the girl smile too. Later that day, as the father went about his routine, his thoughts kept returning to the conversation in the park. He realized how easy it was to walk past people without seeing them, without knowing their stories. He realized how much his daughter had taught him without meaning to. As evening approached, the cold returned, and the sky darkened once more. Somewhere in the park, Li Mei would be preparing herself for another long night. But now, she was no longer invisible, and for the father, this was no longer just about a moment of kindness. It was about a responsibility he was beginning to accept, one careful step at a time. That evening, the apartment felt warmer than usual, not because the heater worked harder, but because the father's thoughts were filled with something deeper. He sat at the small kitchen table while his daughter worked on a drawing beside him. She was using bright crayons, carefully coloring a picture of a house with smoke rising from the chimney. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, slow and steady, covering the world in silence. The father watched his daughter for a moment. Her face was serious as she focused on her picture, her tongue slightly pressed against her lip. Finally, she looked up. "Daddy," she said, "I made a house." "That's a nice house," he replied. "Who lives there?" she smiled. "Everyone who is cold." The simple answer struck him more strongly than she could have known. He nodded and said nothing more, letting her continue. Later, as they ate dinner, the girl grew quiet again. She pushed her food around her plate, clearly thinking about something. The father noticed and waited, knowing she would speak when she was ready. "Daddy," she finally said, "is Li Mei alone tonight?" The father paused. He did not want to lie, but he also did not want to frighten her. "Yes," he said gently, "she is." The girl lowered her head. "That makes my chest feel heavy." He reached across the table and took her hand. "It makes mine feel heavy too." After dinner, they sat together on the couch. The girl leaned against him, wrapped in a soft blanket. The television played quietly in the background, but neither of them paid attention. The father's mind kept returning to the park bench, to Li Mei's tired eyes, and to the way she had held the warm cup of tea as if it were something precious. The girl shifted closer to him. "Daddy," she said softly, "can we help her more?" He took a deep breath. "What do you think we should do?" she thought carefully. "She shouldn't be in the snow. It's almost Christmas." Her words were simple, but they carried a truth that was hard to ignore. The father felt a familiar struggle rise inside him. He wanted to help, but he also felt afraid. He worried about doing the wrong thing, about responsibilities he did not fully understand. Still, his daughter's compassion made it impossible to turn away. "What if," the girl said slowly, "we let her come somewhere warm just for a little while?" The father looked at her. "Do you mean here?" She nodded. "Just for Christmas." He leaned back against the couch, his thoughts racing. He knew this was not a small decision. Bringing a stranger into their home required trust, care, and caution. Yet the idea of leaving Li Mei alone in the cold felt far worse. "I need to think about it," he said honestly. The girl nodded and rested her head on his shoulder. "Okay," she said, "but can we ask her?" That night the father slept poorly. He woke several times, his mind full of questions. Each time, he thought of his daughter's drawing of the house and her simple wish that everyone who was cold could be inside. By morning, he had made a decision. They bundled up warmly and walked together toward the park. The air was sharp, and the sky was heavy with clouds. The girl held her father's hand tightly, her small steps quick and determined. When they reached the bench, Li Mei was there again, sitting quietly, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. She looked up as they approached, surprise flickering across her face. "You came back," she said. "Yes," the father replied, "and I brought someone with me." The girl stepped forward shyly. "Hello," she said, offering a small smile. Li Mei smiled back. "Hello, little one." The girl looked up at her father, then back at Li Mei. "Are you very cold?" Li Mei nodded. "A little," the girl frowned. "You shouldn't be cold on Christmas." The father knelt beside his daughter. "We were wondering," he began carefully, "if you would like to come somewhere warm just for a short time to rest." Li Mei's eyes widened. I don't want to cause trouble, she said quickly. You have already done enough. It wouldn't be trouble, the father replied. We just want you to be safe. The woman looked at the girl who was watching her with open concern, no fear in her eyes. Something in that look seemed to soften her resistance. Just for a little while, Li Mei asked. Yes, the father said, only if you are comfortable. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right. The walk back felt different from the days before. Though the cold was the same, there was a sense of purpose in each step. The girl talked happily, telling Li Mei about the Christmas tree, the lights, and the cookies they planned to bake. Li Mei listened quietly, her expression thoughtful, as if she were remembering something long forgotten. When they reached the apartment, the father opened the door and stepped aside. Welcome, he said simply. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them immediately. Li Mei stopped just inside the door, her eyes taking everything in. The soft light, the small decorations, the smell of dinner from earlier, it all seemed to overwhelm her. The girl took off her boots and coat and hurried to get slippers. These are warm, she said, placing them gently in front of Li Mei. Thank you, Li Mei said, her voice trembling. The father showed her where to sit and brought her a warm drink. She held the cup with both hands, closing her eyes as she took the first sip. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. I did not expect this, she said quietly. Neither did we, the father replied honestly. They spent the evening together in simple ways. The girl showed Li Mei her drawings. Li Mei shared stories about the food she used to cook and the festivals she remembered from her childhood. They laughed softly, the sound gentle and unfamiliar after days of silence. As night fell, the father prepared a place for Li Mei to rest. It was not much, but it was warm and clean. Li Mei thanked him again and again, her gratitude clear in every word. Before going to bed, the girl hugged her father tightly. I'm glad she's not in the snow tonight, she whispered. So am I, he replied, holding her close. That night, as the apartment grew quiet, the father lay awake, listening to the soft sounds of breathing in the next room. He knew the days ahead would not be simple, but he also knew that something important had already changed. A door had opened, not just in their home, but in their hearts. Morning light entered the apartment softly, touching the walls and the small decorations near the window. The smell of warm tea filled the air. Li Mei woke slowly, unsure at first where she was. For a moment she expected to feel the cold bench beneath her, but instead she felt a soft blanket and warmth around her shoulders. She sat up carefully and listened. The apartment was quiet, peaceful. She stood and walked slowly toward the kitchen. The father was already awake, preparing breakfast. When he saw her, he smiled gently. Good morning, he said. Good morning, Li Mei replied, her voice calm but careful. Did you sleep well? He asked. She nodded. Better than I have in a long time. They sat at the table together, speaking softly so they would not wake the child. The father placed a simple breakfast in front of her. Li Mei looked at the food for a moment before eating, as if reminding herself that this was real. Soon, small footsteps came down the hallway. The little girl appeared, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Li Mei at the table, her face brightened. You're still here, she said happily. Yes, Li Mei replied with a small smile. Good morning. The girl climbed into her chair. Today is almost Christmas, she said. We have many things to do. The father laughed softly. Slow down, he said. We'll take it one step at a time. That day passed gently. The girl helped Li Mei hang small paper decorations she had made at school. Li Mei watched closely, impressed by how much care the child put into simple things. She remembered doing similar activities long ago when life felt steady and full. At one point, Li Mei stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. It's beautiful, she said quietly, cold but beautiful. The father joined her. Winter can be hard, he said, but it can also remind us to stay close. She nodded. That is true. In the afternoon, they went for a short walk together. Li Mei wore a warm coat the father had found for her. The girl proudly held her hand as they walked. Neighbors passed by, some smiling politely, others not noticing at all. Li Mei felt a strange mix of emotions. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel invisible. Later that evening, the father made a careful phone call. He spoke quietly in the other room, asking about local help centers and community groups. He did not share many details, only that someone needed support and guidance. When he returned, Li Mei looked at him with concern. "You do not have to do this," she said. "I want to," he replied. "Everyone deserves help." She nodded slowly, grateful but still unsure. Accepting kindness had always been difficult for her. As Christmas Eve arrived, the apartment felt full of warmth and quiet joy. They baked simple cookies together. The girl laughed when flour covered her nose, and Li Mei smiled more freely than she had in years. She shared stories about holidays from her past, about songs and meals and family gatherings that once filled her life. That night they sat together near the small tree. The lights blinked softly. The girl yawned and leaned against Li Mei's arm. "Thank you for staying," the child whispered. Li Mei's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for asking," she replied. When the girl went to bed, Li Mei sat quietly with the father. "I don't know what will happen next," she said honestly. "We'll figure it out," he answered, "one step at a time." On Christmas morning, the girl woke early and ran to the living room. She laughed when she saw the simple gifts on the table. Li Mei watched from the doorway, her heart full. She had not expected to feel joy again, especially not like this. Later that day, the father spoke again about plans. He explained that there were people who could help Li Mei find a safe place and steady support. He promised she would not be left alone again. Li Mei listened carefully. "I am afraid," she admitted, "but I am also hopeful." "That's okay," he said. "Both feelings can exist together." As evening came, they shared a quiet meal. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside, the apartment was warm with laughter, shared stories, and a growing sense of trust. Li Mei realized that this was more than shelter. It was kindness without expectation. It was being seen. That night, as everyone went to sleep, Li Mei whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would accept help. She would try again. And for the father and his daughter, this Christmas became something deeper than celebration. It became a reminder that small acts of care can change lives, slowly and truly. The days after Christmas moved slowly, like snow melting under soft sunlight. The decorations remained on the walls, but the excitement had settled into something quieter and deeper. Li Mei stayed in the apartment a little longer, not as a guest anymore, but as someone slowly finding her place again in the world. Each morning, she woke early out of habit. At first, she felt uneasy staying in bed too long, as if warmth might disappear if she did not guard it. But with time, she learned to relax. She helped prepare breakfast, washing dishes carefully and folding towels neatly. These small tasks gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. The little girl followed her everywhere. She asked endless questions, not out of curiosity alone, but out of care. She wanted to know what foods Li Mei liked, what stories she remembered, and what made her smile. Li Mei answered patiently, sometimes laughing at how serious the child looked when listening. One afternoon, as snow fell lightly outside, the girl brought Li Mei a piece of paper. "This is for you," she said proudly. It was a drawing of 3 people holding hands under a bright yellow sun. A small house stood behind them. "That's us," the girl explained. "So you won't forget." Li Mei felt her throat tighten. She held the paper close, unable to speak for a moment. No one had drawn her into their life like that before. "I will never forget," she finally said. The father continued making phone calls and visiting local offices during the week. He spoke to people who understood how to help without judgment. It took time and patience. Some days felt hopeful, others confusing. But slowly, a path began to form. Li Mei listened carefully as he explained each step: temporary housing, language support, community meals, and small job programs. None of it sounded easy, but for the first time it sounded possible. "I am afraid I will fail," she admitted one evening. The father shook his head gently. "Failing means you stopped trying," he said. "You haven't stopped." Those words stayed with her. The day came when Li Mei was ready to move into a small shared home run by a local community group. It was warm, safe, and filled with people who had stories much like hers. The night before she left, the apartment felt quiet in a new way. The girl packed a small bag for Li Mei herself. She placed the drawing inside, along with a scarf she loved. "So you stay warm," she said seriously. Li Mei hugged her tightly, holding back tears. "You already warmed my heart," she whispered. On the morning of her move, the father walked Li Mei to the door. Snow no longer fell as heavily, and the air felt lighter. "Thank you," Li Mei said again, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "Just keep going." She nodded and stepped outside, turning back once to wave. Life did not become perfect after that. There were challenges, slow days, and moments of doubt. But Li Mei learned to ask for help without shame. She joined language classes and helped cook meals at the center. People began to know her name. Weeks turned into months. The little girl often asked about her. They visited whenever they could, bringing fruit or tea, sitting together and talking. Li Mei looked healthier each time, her eyes brighter, her steps steadier. One spring afternoon, as flowers replaced snow, Li Mei shared happy news. She had found part-time work at a small shop. It was simple work, but it gave her pride. The girl clapped her hands. "I knew you could do it," Li Mei laughed. "You believed in me first." Years passed quietly. The little girl grew taller. Her voice changed. She remembered that winter clearly, even as many other memories faded. She remembered the bench, the snow, and the woman who taught her that kindness was not something to wait for. Li Mei remained part of their lives, not always close but never far. On holidays, they shared meals. On birthdays, they exchanged small gifts and warm smiles. One winter evening, long after that first Christmas, the girl, now older, walked through the same park with her father. The bench was still there. She stopped and looked at it for a moment. "Daddy," she said softly, "that's where it started, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yes. I'm glad we didn't walk away." "So am I," he replied. Somewhere else in the city, Li Mei sat in a warm room, holding an old drawing that had faded with time but never with meaning. Kindness had changed all of them, not loudly, not suddenly, but truly.